On February 7, 1979, Brazilian police officer Expedito Dias heard a phone call. His shift at the police station in the coastal town of Bertioga was already coming to an end. A policeman was informed by phone about a man who drowned on Incita Beach. When Diaz arrived at the scene, he found that there were practically no people there, only one body, which was followed by Austrian Lieselot Bossert. A fake name. The deceased, who suffered a stroke, was identified as a 54-year-old Austrian citizen Wolfgang Gerhard. But 6 years later, the world will discover that this is not a real name. In fact, it was Josef Mengele, a German doctor who conducted cruel medical experiments on prisoners of the Auschwitz concentration camp during World War II. How did the angel of death end up in Brazil? Like many other Nazi war criminals, Mengele initially sought refuge in Argentina, a country where many people with German roots lived. Mengele felt at home in Argentina, explains Brazilian historian Marcos Guterman, author of a book about Nazis who fled to South America after World War II. In addition to Mengele, another Nazi who fled to Argentina was Adolf Eichmann, a Gestapo officer responsible for the final solution of the Jewish question. In 1960, Eichmann was tracked down, abducted and taken to Israel by Mossad employees, and in 1962 he was executed in Israel by a court verdict. After the war, Mengele ended up in Argentina, then went to Uruguay, then to Paraguay and finally to Brazil. When defeat in World War II became inevitable, the Nazis were faced with a choice: try to hide, go to prison, or die. On January 17, 1945, 10 days before the Soviet troops liberated Auschwitz, Josef Mengele escaped. He was detained by the US military, but they did not recognize him as a war criminal. He was released in July. Mengele worked on a potato farm in southern Germany for another 4 years, then he finally managed to leave for Argentina. Israeli authorities tracked him down in 1959, and German authorities issued an arrest warrant. However, by the time the Argentine government made this decision, Mengele had already disappeared. And before you continue watching, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Of course, this is optional. Doctor's career and crimes. Josef Mengele was born in Günzburg, Bavaria in 1911 in the family of a wealthy industrialist. But instead of continuing the family business, he became a doctor. In 1943, he came to Auschwitz, becoming the chief physician of Birkenau, one of the inner camps of Auschwitz. Of all the doctors, Mengele was the most cruel. He played the role of God and decided the fate of the people who were brought to the camp, says American journalist Gerald Posner. Some prisoners were sent to labor camps, others to gas chambers. In the third group there were twins, dwarfs and people with disabilities. They became the objects of monstrous experiments by Mengele. His research, which had nothing to do with science, included tests for the duration of a person's stay at a very high temperature. Hermit. Josef Mengele came to Brazil in 1961 under the name Peter Hochbichler and settled in the town of Nova Europa, 318 kilometers from São Paulo. With the support of Wolfgang Gerhard, a Nazi sympathizer who had lived in Brazil since 1948, he was introduced to a Hungarian family who hired him to take care of their coffee plantation, not knowing who he really was. Fearing capture, Mengele rarely left the house and spent time reading Goethe and listening to Strauss. He walked the streets only in special clothes that disguised his appearance, and accompanied by trained dogs. Eventually his employers found out that they were harboring a war criminal, but Mengele paid them for their silence. The reward is $3.4 million. The last refuge of Josef Mengele was the city of São Paulo, the largest and most populated in Brazil. He lived with Lieselot and Wolfram Bossert, with whom he was on the day of his death. Every night Mengele put a gun under his pillow. A reward of $3.4 million was announced for the capture of Mengele, alive or dead. In 1977, Josef Mengele was found by his son Rolf Jenkel, who spent 2 weeks visiting his father. In a TV interview filmed in 1986, Jenkel said that, in his opinion, Mengele did not repent. He did not admit that he had done something wrong. He told me he was only following orders. Death and the disclosure of the mystery. In the late 70s, after Gerhard's return to Austria, Mengele took his name and documents. Under this name he was buried in 1979 near Sao Paulo. Only in 1985, it became known about the true whereabouts of Josef Mengele. Or rather, his graves. A married couple from Austria who lived in Brazil reported that Mengele was Wolfgang Gerhard, who had been their neighbor for several years. The couple claimed that 6 years ago he drowned, that he was 67 years old at the time, and indicated the location of his grave, the town of Embu. In the same year, 1985, the exhumation of the remains of the deceased was carried out. At each stage of this event, 3 independent groups of forensic medical experts participated in it, and a live TV broadcast from the cemetery was shown in almost all countries of the world. The coffin contained only the decayed bones of the deceased. However, everyone was looking forward to the results of their identification. For millions of people wanted to know whether these remains really belonged to a cruel misanthrope and executioner who has been wanted for many years. The chances of scientists to establish the identity of the deceased were regarded as quite high. The fact is that they had at their disposal an extensive archive of data about Josef Mengele. The SS file from the time of the war contained information about his height, weight, geometry of the skull, the condition of the teeth. The pictures clearly showed the characteristic gap between the front upper teeth. The specialists who examined the burial in the Embu had to be very careful when making conclusions. The desire to find Josef Mengele was so great that there had already been cases of his erroneous identification, including falsified ones. The results obtained, compared with the data on the identity of Mengele from the SS file, gave experts reason to almost certainly consider the examined remains to belong to a wanted war criminal. A DNA test conducted in England 7 years later confirmed these findings. Mengele's son never applied for the release of his father's remains, and for 3 decades they were kept at the Institute of Forensic Medicine of Sao Paulo. In 2016, at the initiative of the expert Daniel Romero Munoz, who conducted the examination of the remains, they began to be used as teaching material at the university at the Faculty of Medicine. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you are interested in the topic of the Second World War, then I recommend watching other videos on my channel. You will find a lot of interesting things for yourself. Please make sure you subscribe to me. This will greatly help the development of my channel.